Todd, can you get my PowerPoint up, please? Do you know the name Rudyard Kipling, English author? Mostly children's stories, but he also wrote poems and novels. He was born 1865 and died in 1936. And one of the series of stories that he wrote were called Just So stories. Just So stories. And these were things like how the elephant got his long trunk, how the camel got his hump, how the rhinoceros got his skin, how the leopard got his spots. And these were fantastical stories that were imaginative. They were designed for children. Obviously, they're not true, but it was his explanation for how these animals got the way that they are. Just So stories. And I start with that because in many ways, scientists are like that. They come up with these just so stories that all these things just kind of happen and all time and chance and it all came together and then there was life. And then from that single cell life, the multitude and the complexity of life developed. Just So stories. Of course, from the scientific viewpoint, they look at us and say that we have our own just so stories. But tonight we'll look at some things and see which side we think that we're on for the just so stories. So we start off by just asking the question, what is evolution? What is evolution?
Change.
Change, okay. In the broadest sense, yes. Joe?
Adaptation.
Adaptation, okay. Things in the environment change and that causes life to change with it in some aspects.
A theory.
It's a theory. It's certainly a theory. Is it proven? No, it's a theory. And the definition that I came up with, let me see if this is going to work. Billions of years ago. I remember when I was young, they were talking about millions of years ago, but they decided it took more time than that, so now it's billions. They estimate that the Earth is about 4 billion years old, or something like that, 4.4. But billions of years ago, lifeless matter came together in the right combinations with the right natural forces and developed one or more living things. And those living things changed and developed and gained features and forms, and suddenly we have all living and extinct plants, animals, and man. That's evolution. Within evolution, there's a couple of ways of looking at that. One is general evolution, which is pretty much what we've just described there, that from original one-celled organism, all plants, all animals, and man has ultimately come. Special evolution is a little bit different in that it describes changes within an organism like dogs. I imagine that when God created dogs in the Garden of Eden, all the breeds that we see today were not represented there. Were the genes in that original dog? Yes, I believe they were. But all the breeds that we have today were not evident in the garden. When Noah was putting dogs on the ark, he didn't have to round up all the breeds that we see today. He brought on whatever dogs were there. So we will admit that there's change that occurs, but organisms don't change from what they were originally. No matter what you do to a dog to modify it by genetically breeding, it's still a dog. Plants, when you hybridize those, they are still the kind of plant that they were originally, although they may bear some different colors, some different forms. They may be resistant to some diseases that they weren't before, but they are still that kind of plant. They don't change to become something else. This is sometimes referred to microevolution. The previous general evolution is sometimes referred to as macroevolution. And of course, as Christians, we don't believe in either. Well, we can accept this one, I think, that organisms will change, but general evolution, that from a single cell, all life has developed, I think that's contrary to what the Bible has to say. Special creation. The things that you see on the earth today came from an original thing very much like it that was created. It didn't come from inanimate things without supernatural force, God's power that created things. Within these created kinds, we see changes that will occur, and that can be environment, it can be genetics, the way that they interbreed. These things can bring about changes within an animal or plant. Do you know how many kinds of animals are described in Genesis? How many kinds? There are 5. We have fish, birds, cattle, creeping things, and beasts. And man is distinct from all of those. Man is not any one of those. Although evolutionists will tell you that man came from beast. He's a smarter primate, formerly a chimpanzee or something. 5 different kinds, and man is distinct from all of them. We believe a special creation. God's creative power in the beginning, just as Moses wrote in the book of Genesis. Biogenesis or spontaneous generation. This is the argument. Biogenesis is what the Bible teaches, that life comes from life. Although God took inanimate things, he endued it with life because of his supernatural agency and power. And from that original life, all life has continued to this day. Scientists who support evolution and teach and believe this, teach that life comes from non-life or inorganic materials through natural processes, not supernatural. Natural processes and the right assembly of chemicals and compounds, and voila, life occurs. Has this ever been seen in nature? No. Has it ever been done in a laboratory? No. Man still cannot create life. At some point in the future, will man be able to create life in a laboratory? I don't know. I suspect not. But even if he does, what has he proven? That he took materials that were God created, and from that created life. God started with nothing and created life. Joe?
He proved that you need intelligence to create life.
It would prove exactly that it's not just putting things together, but it also took intelligence to bring the right things together to apply whatever force is going to be the life animating force. So yes, you've proven the need for intelligence. There's one other form of evolution I want to talk about, and that is theistic evolution. And that's the idea that God started things off and then stepped back and let evolution take over and bring us to where we are today. And of course, this took place over millions of years, or billions of years, thousands of millions of years, a long, long time. I see this as an effort to try and keep a foot in each camp. You're wanting to kind of side with what the scientists have to say, hold to what God says, and that's exactly where I was as a young child when I had my fascination with dinosaurs. And I could read those books and talk about the periods that these dinosaurs lived in, and it all made sense. And then I go to church and I talk about creation, and that all made sense. And never did I ever try to reconcile those two together. And we'll look at some things in just a moment about reconciling those. It can't be done. It's just an attempt to satisfy both sides of the argument, and it fails. So what's the problem with theistic evolution? Evolution is totally at odds with the Genesis account. When you look at what evolution teaches on the left side and compare that to what Moses had to say in the Genesis account about creation, you see a whole number of things that evolution has exactly backwards. So take a look at some of those. The sun came before earth. Moses says the earth was formed, and the sun doesn't come until a couple of days later. Sea creatures before land plants. Again, the Genesis account has those flipped. Here's a few more. Land animals before trees. Genesis says trees were created before land animals. The fourth one down there, the sun was before plants. Now, in the theistic evolutionary view, it's still a process that occurred over millions of years. And so each day, with God, 1,000 years is as a day, and a day is as 1,000 years. So the days of Genesis are really these incredibly long periods of time that gave evolution the opportunity to unfold and form all of these things. But the Genesis account tells you that plants were created and then the sun was created. So if this day is millions of years, how did plants survive without the sun for photosynthesis? Doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense. In the handout, I asked you to find some things that Jesus had to say regarding creation. Did anybody find some passages they'd like to share? David?
In talking at one point about, he was asked questions about divorce.
Okay.
And about, they said, why did Moses give them a certificate of divorce and so forth? And he said, from the beginning, it was not so. And he ends up saying, this is from Mark 10, verse 6, but from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. Therefore, shall a man leave his father, and so on.
Okay.
So he's alluding to creation itself.
Right.
And the fact that God made male and female.
Okay. And when did he make them? From the beginning. Where would theistic evolution put man in the evolutionary, not the creation, in the evolutionary development? Millions of years, billions of years down the road. Is that the beginning? No, it's not the beginning. Is Jesus mistaken? Was Moses mistaken in what he wrote?
According to our lesson 2 on Sunday morning.
Okay. No, exactly. We have amazing parallel in class, don't we? Anybody else find another passage? I had Matthew 19 for that rather than the Mark, but it's the same account.
I don't have particular ones, but after each creation, he said God saw it and it was good.
Okay, but I'm looking for what Jesus has to say about it. It is good. It is good. That's what Moses wrote, though. So what did Jesus have to say? There's a couple more things that I was able to find. Anybody else, Joe?
Mark 13, 19.
What is that?
He's indicating man's suffering started very near the beginning of creation.
Okay. Mark 13, 19. You want to read that? You have that passage, Joe?
For in those days there will be such tribulation as has not been from the beginning of creation, that God created until now and never will.
Okay. Again, Jesus is describing the creative work of God at the beginning. And again, you have to ask, is Jesus mistaken? In John chapter 5, verse 45, this one I think is pretty powerful. Jesus says there, do not think that I shall accuse you to the Father. There is one who accuses you, Moses, in whom you trust. For if you believed Moses, you would believe me, for he wrote about me. But if you don't believe his writings, how will you believe my words? Jesus is testifying that the things that Moses wrote are accurate. They are true. They are trustworthy. They are absolutely believable. The thing is, when you start questioning the Genesis account and say, well, maybe it's not quite the way, are you saying that God is incapable of stating something in a way that we can understand to clearly describe what he did in his creative efforts? And when science disagrees with what the Genesis account is, which side do you take? Do you go with what science has to say, or do you go with what God has to say? I want to bring up one other passage, and this is, again, maybe not Jesus speaking, but it comes from Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy 19, verse 10. Here Moses is writing to the children of Israel before they're about to go into the promised land. And he's reminding them about all the things that God has done. And in this passage of Deuteronomy 9, verse 10, Moses says, the Lord delivered to me 2 tablets of stone written with the finger of God. These tablets of stone were written with the finger of God. This is not something that Moses engraved. This was God's writing. And on them were all the words which God had spoken to you on the mountain from the midst of the fire in the day of the assembly. What was on these 2 tablets? God's writing, but more than that, it had the 10 commandments. What is 10 commandment or 4th commandment of the 10 commandments? Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Why? Verse 4 of that Exodus passage tells why. Why man was to keep the Sabbath. Because just as God created in 6 days and rested on the 7th, man is expected to work for 6 days and rest on the Sabbath. So the parallel kind of breaks down if you say, well, God worked for millions of years in day 1, and then millions of years elapsed in 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but day 7 is just a 24-hour period. Or is it man supposed to work for 6 days and then take a million days off on Sunday? It'd be kind of nice benefits if you get a job like that. So Jesus has things to say, Moses has things to say, and God, writing on the tablets, has things to say about his creation. Let's talk about, sorry, I'm behind in my slides. Those are the passages that I presented along with Deuteronomy 9:10. All right, let's talk about simple life. I'll give you just a moment to read that. Evolution is dangerous. Simple life. Charles Darwin was born 1809. He died 1882. And he's the one responsible for this thing called evolution. In his day and age, they didn't have the technology to understand all the complexity of life and even single-celled organisms. To them, single-celled organisms are the simplest form of life and therefore must be the starting point from which all other life has come. They didn't have the technology that we have today that allows us to investigate and see right into the cell and see just how complex it really is. And to show you what I mean, we'll look at a single-celled organism. This is an amoeba. I loved biology class when we were supposed to draw things, and they asked me to draw an amoeba because I could put anything on the paper, and that's an amoeba. Draw some circles in it, that's an amoeba because they have no shape, right? Nice and easy. That's a guaranteed A right there. Naturalistic evolutionists claim that a one-celled amoeba or something like it came together by spontaneous generation without intelligent intervention And then from that, all biological life has come. This is general evolution. And believers in this have many titles that they take for themselves. They call themselves naturalistic evolutionists, materialists, humanists, atheists, Darwinists. But regardless of what label you stick on it, the question remains, is this true? Did some collection of inanimate, lifeless matter come together with some natural force and become life? That's the supreme problem for Darwinists, the origin of life. For this to be true, life had to have spontaneously generated from non-living chemicals. And this is by no means simple. In 1953, a pair of scientists, James Watson and Francis Crick, discovered DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, the chemical that encodes instructions for the building and replicating of all living things. DNA has this twisted ladder appearance. The sides of the ladder are composed of alternating deoxyribose and phosphate molecules. The rungs of the ladder appear in a specific order, and they are composed of 4 nitrogen bases. These bases are adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine, which are commonly represented by the letters A, T, C, and G. These letters, as scientists use them, comprise what is known as the 4-letter genetic alphabet. This is just like our English alphabet. How many letters in our alphabet? 26. How many letters in the Greek alphabet? 24. The Roman alphabet? 23. Hebrew? 22. We don't need 26 letters to express ourselves. I know of an alphabet with only 2 characters. You know what that is? Binary? Okay. I hadn't thought of that one, but that's true. How about Morse code? It's got a dot and a dash. And with those 2 symbols, you can create any message that you want that someone else who knows Morse code can take it and read it. And in the same way, DNA, I'm sorry? I guess it would. You got me beat. Thank you. One dot on the page. I think they are all dots, aren't they? Braille?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Aren't they all just? Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Thank you. Should have talked to you sooner. These appear in a specific order. It's not just these 4 bases that just kind of haphazardly assemble. They are in a specific order, and they define the organism that's going to develop based on the specific complex instructions in the DNA. This is what is known as specified complexity. It is complex, and it contains a specific message. This complexity becomes obvious when you consider the message that's found in something even as simple as a single-celled amoeba. Amoebas are so small, you can line 100 or more of them up, and they won't even cover an inch. They're small. Richard Hawking, a staunch Darwinist, admits that the message found in just the nucleus of the cell nucleus of an amoeba carries the equivalent of all 30 volumes of the Encyclopedia Britannica. In other words, all the letters that go into those 30 volumes, you'll find that many characters in the nitrogen bases that comprise the DNA structure. So within just the nucleus of the cell, a full set of the Encyclopedia Britannica, 30 volumes. That's a lot of detail. And if you take the cell in its entirety, it's 1,000 sets of the Encyclopedia Britannica. And again, these are not just things that are haphazardly thrown together, X number of characters. They are in a specific order to create that form of life. How do you explain that without any intelligence behind that sequencing? I find it impossible. You wouldn't expect a printing press to blow up, and as they dig through the debris, they find 30-volume sets of the Encyclopedia Britannica that just came together because of the blast. It doesn't work that way. So here's a fact as we investigate the origin of life. No human ever saw the origin of life. Even by the time man came along, the earth had been in existence for 5 days, depending on when he was made. Sometime on the 6th day. Well, I guess it was late in the day because he was made a little before Eve, right? Yeah, that's right. So how do we discover what caused life? Yeah, that wasn't a joke. How do we discover what caused life? Since we can't go back and see what happened, what principles do we apply? And the principle that's applied is called the principle of uniformity. And from that principle, that just means that as things work today, we expect they worked that way in the past. Nothing has really changed in the way that things work together. So let's consider the Grand Canyon as we apply this principle. What caused the Grand Canyon to form? Other than, I'm sorry? What?
Water and melting ice.
Water, ice, okay. Over time, erosion, Grand Canyon. Did you see that? You saw that happen. But you've seen the Grand Canyon. You've seen the results of it. And I think many of us have probably seen the Grand Canyon. And if you haven't, I'm sure everyone has seen pictures of it. It makes sense. You look at it and you think, yep, there's a lot of erosion there. Scientists will tell you it took millions of years to accomplish. I don't know about that. But I think we can agree that it was formed by erosion. That seems pretty reasonable. So let's consider another geologic formation, Mount Rushmore. What caused it to appear as it does now? Erosion? You're smiling. You don't think erosion caused Mount Rushmore? 4 heads detailed carved into the mountain of presidents of the United States? Not erosion? An intelligent sculptor and lots of helpers carved these. This is not natural erosion. Our common sense is what's being applied here, but we're using the principle of uniformity. We don't see erosion creating detailed carvings that look like figures that we know, people that we know. We don't see that.
You're talking about the mountain or the men carved on it. Because Mount Rushmore is the mountain, and it wasn't formed by men.
It was not. I'm talking about the carvings that are on it. Yes.
You're not talking about Mount Rushmore, you're just talking about 4 faces.
I stand corrected.
Mount Rushmore is a mountain.
Yes, it is. My apologies for being unclear. But I think we know what I'm referring to when we hear the name Mount Rushmore. Is there any doubt that erosion is not responsible for the faces that appear on Mount Rushmore? No doubt in my mind. And we have seen, no, I'll leave that alone. Okay. So what would cause the information equivalent of 1,000 encyclopedias to assemble? Natural forces or supernatural forces? The message is too complex. It's too specific. So how is it that Darwin has come to the conclusion that the first life generated spontaneously from non-living chemicals without intelligent intervention? How did they come up with that idea? Well, it's because of their viewpoint. Richard Dawkins, again, The Blind Watchmaker, the book that he wrote, he describes biology as the study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. They give the appearance of having been designed. He doesn't want to admit a design because, as we learned in an earlier lesson, where there's a design, there is a designer. So in his view, when you look at life in its forms, you're not really seeing a design there. You're just seeing something that appears to be a design. A couple of pages later in that same book, he acknowledges the intricate architecture and precision engineering in human life and in each of the trillions of cells within the human body, but then he denies that human life or any other life has been designed. Apparently, he's not going to let his observations interfere with his belief. That's the only thing that I can conclude. Francis Crick, the man who was a co-discoverer of DNA, had this to say: biologists must constantly keep in mind that what they see was not designed, but evolved. So who are you going to believe? Your lying eyes or me? Is what he's asking. The man who's discovered the complexity and the coding within DNA still can't see beyond that to a design. This is all just something that has evolved. The complexity of DNA. We've already described the complexity, the four-letter code, the compounds that comprise DNA, the amazing amount of information that is stored in such a very small space. But the origin for this becomes a problem also. And the author that I was reading called this the chicken or egg dilemma. What is that? Chicken or egg dilemma? Which came first, the chicken or the egg? Can anybody answer that question?
Yes.
The chicken came first. Why do you say that?
I don't either.
Because it was created. Exactly. So why do we use that as an example for something that's unknowable? Which came first, the chicken or the egg?
Because if you don't believe the scriptural version of it, it's unknowable.
Okay. So here's the dilemma. DNA relies on proteins for its production. Proteins rely on DNA for their production. So if one relies on two and two relies on one, which came first? And scientists don't have an answer for that. It must have just happened at the same moment or something. Why do they insist on ignoring the plain implications of the evidence staring them in the face? I think it's because of their preconceived ideology, naturalism. They automatically start with a viewpoint that there is no supernatural. Everything can be explained from a natural point of view. Natural forces, the availability of materials and compounds and chemicals within nature, all of this came into existence. All of it just happened. We don't need an intelligent cause. As we mentioned before, in our search for causes, there can be only two options, and that is intelligence or non-intelligence. The Grand Canyon was non-intelligence, right? Natural forces. Natural forces are not intelligent. Erosion. Mount Rushmore, the carvings of the heads on Mount Rushmore, that came about from an intelligent cause. Darwinists will argue that time and chance If you've got enough time, anything can happen, even if it is extremely rare. Is that true? Think about it this way. Let's go back to Mount Rushmore and the figures that are carved on the front. Darwinists assert that science is built on observation and repetition. So let's observe and repeat an experiment where we allow the natural laws to work on that rock for the next 10 years. Will those figures become more sharply formed, or will they smooth and lose detail over time? 20 years, 30 years, 100 years, 1,000 years, 1,000,000 years. What will the faces on Mount Rushmore appear like given a span like that? Are they still going to look as freshly chiseled as they do now? I would say probably not, because we know what erosion does. It's going to smooth and flatten and remove the detail that had been applied by intelligence. We'll never get faces on Mount Rushmore to appear by natural means. Let's think of it in another way. Suppose you fly an airplane over our parking lot. You're at 1,000 feet and you throw out bags of red, white, and blue confetti. What are the chances that confetti is going to fall 1,000 feet, and when it lands in our parking lot, it will fall in the form of the American flag? Barry, you're doing this. It's not going to happen? Donna?
So if man evolved over billions of years and we have man, over all this time, why weren't cars and airplanes and everything created? Because they're less simple than a man, so why weren't they created too? Why do we have to create them?
Why wouldn't have planes and trains and
Yeah, why
other
does
things?
they
Why didn't they
evolve?
form on their own?
Yeah, why do we have to do them?
I don't have an answer for that.
Because they're a lot simpler than
But-
a human.
But they are an assembly of non-intelligent things. What would have brought those together in the right shapes
It'd
and
be a lot
sizes?
easier for them to.
I don't know. Okay, so time and chance. Maybe if we flew at a higher altitude so it had longer to fall, would that improve our odds of getting an American flag when we dump it out from 10,000 feet? No, it'd be worse, wouldn't it? Probably even less, even falling in the parking lot, much less forming in any recognizable shape. David?
Can I make one quick point about
Sure.
this point about time and chance? You had talked earlier about microevolution versus macroevolution.
Right?
And this time and chance, get into that discussion as well. I think it's very important, not only for us to understand, but especially for our kids, especially as the kids approach colleges and universities, to understand, because microevolution, as you said, is something that shows small changes can occur within groups of things, whether it's a change of a color of a moth, or the change of a beak of Darwin's finches,
Right.
whatever, that can occur, and is a fact. And we would be foolish to deny that that is a fact.
Exactly.
But what macroevolutionists say is they take microevolution, which is a fact, and they say, well, you just extrapolate that over, that's where the time
Right.
and chance comes in. If you have enough time and enough organisms, then you'll get the macroevolution, which is what we deny.
Right.
But if our kids don't understand that those are micro and macro are two very different things, and that one that's observable and repeatable in a lab, and the other that's never been observed or repeated, those are two different things. And if they just say, I deny evolution, period, end of story, they're going to be laughed at.
Right.
And it's important, I think, for them to understand where this argument comes in, and what to admit and what to deny.
Thank you. Time and chance. 200 protein molecules together are required for life. Atheists and theists alike have calculated the probability that life could arise by chance from non-living chemicals. The figures that they calculate are astronomically small. One researcher said that this was the probability of getting one protein molecule. Take a grain of sand and mark it so that it's identifiable. Put it somewhere in the Sahara Desert, blindfold a man, and ask him to find that one marked grain of sand 3 times in a row. That will get you one protein. But to get life, you need 200 of those. So the numbers, the odds become so astronomical, they're beyond imagining for my finite mind, for sure. And I would argue that even then the probability is probably actually 0, because chance is not a cause. Chance is what scientists describe as a possibility, a probability. It has no power on its own. If you have a coin, it's got a head and a tail on it. What are the odds that it's going to come up heads when you flip this? On average, 50-50. For a fair coin, when you flip it, 50-50 chance for it coming up heads or tails. That's the probability. But what is it really? The coin, without intelligence, is only going to lay there. It's not going to do anything. It's always going to be whatever side was up. It takes intelligence to flip the coin, to apply force to it, and then wind, gravity, the surface that it hits upon, that all plays a factor in whether it's going to come up heads or tails. That's where you get the probability, is when an intelligent force acts on that coin, not the coin itself. It'll always just be in that one position until some other force acts upon it. So evolution is dangerous. You've had time to read that. I thank you for your participation today. Lessons for next week are out on the foyer counter, so pick one of those up, and I'll see you next week. Thank you.